Which will be on Sub-Clover with Lisa Miller. So Lisa, can you give us a run through of your video just to jog our memories?
Yep, I'll just share my screen so you can have a look at one of my slides.
There you go.
Oh, not quite getting it up at this stage.
I've just sent through your co-host.
Okay, I'll just get it up.
Yep, we can see it now, Lisa.
And it's fully up, is it?
You need to go to your slideshow.
Okay, I'm clicking on that. Yep, here we go. Okay, so yeah, this video steps through the different stages of Sub-Clover growth and its life cycle, and it provides, I guess, tips on management of Sub-Clover, so you can consistently have good Sub-Clover every year. It's based on 3 Sub-Clover fact sheets that we wrote for MLA on grazing management, and they're currently available from SFS office or through the MLA website, or contact me directly. And it forms part of a Sub-Clover package that we've got through funding from MLA, and we're writing more fact sheets, and we've got one soon to be released on a diagnostic guide, you know, why is my clover poor? So that's about the video.
So how much Sub-Clover content are you potentially losing if you're rotational grazing?
Yeah, so rotational grazing sort of favours the taller growing grasses. So we're losing up to sort of, in some of the trials that have been done, sort of about 55 to 60% of the Sub-Clover. So you've got to make a sort of a special effort to make sure that your Sub-Clover is going to persist in those sort of rotational grazing systems.
And to make sure, yeah, you maintain it and keep it well.
So tips, I suppose, to do that is that obviously clover, being prostrate growing, likes to be grazed short. So to particularly graze heavily over that winter period, a couple of good grazings down to about 1,000 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, or about 3 centimetres in height, is pretty important to be able to keep that Sub-Clover short. That means it's got keeping it short means it grows more leaves, because the light is getting more access to light. More leaves means more flowers, which means more seeds, adds to that seed bank. So you're going to be able to get a good germination in the following year. So, you know, obviously with rotational grazing, it's really important to protect the grasses and to replenish those carbohydrates for your desirable perennial grasses. But those grasses also need the nitrogen, and the nitrogen comes from the Sub-Clover as well. So you've got to do a bit of a juggling act, and you don't need to be, potentially heavily graze over winter every time, although I think most people find that they need to anyway. But yeah, it's just something to keep in mind to keep that clover in the system.
Any questions from the room?
I think I had Nick's questions, didn't I? So
yeah, I've got a couple more here. So the video focused on grazing management. What are the big soil constraints?
Yep, so that would be, in our part of the world, it would be soil phosphorus, soil acidity, and molybdenum, and maybe some molybdenum deficiency. So with the phosphorus, with the long-term phosphate trial, they found that Sub-Clover completely disappeared out of the system once you got Olsen P levels less than 6. So important to be adding fertiliser, phosphorus fertiliser in our systems. You'll get maximum growth up to about an Olsen P of about 15 milligrams per kilogram. The soil acidity, Sub-Clover is quite tolerant of soil acidity. So it'll still be there in the system up right down to about a pH of 4.3, but its growth will be a lot less, and it probably won't be fixing any nitrogen. So what will happen in those systems is that you know, no nitrogen, that'll encourage silvergrass, and you'll get more sort of weed invasion of those lower fertility loving grasses. The molybdenum's really important for nitrogen fixation as well, and it's going to be more of an issue on soils with low clay content, lighter textured soils, and when pH drops below about 5. So they would be the big 3 soil constraints that that we see that would, if we can address those, then we'll get some really good, grow some really good clover.
I know this is a very left field question. Is there any work on acid tolerant rhizobia for clovers?
I'm not aware of any, only in the lucerne and I suppose faba bean, but no doubt they'd probably be looking at that as well. It is a bit more acid tolerant than perhaps something like lucerne that requires a pH of at least, probably a desirable pH of 6. You know, it is a bit lower than that, but yeah, it's, I think a lot of people, I think the work that has been done, particularly in New South Wales, has shown that I think that something like of 220 paddocks that they surveyed, they had really poor nodulation of Sub-Clover. Something like 70% of the paddocks were not nodulated effectively to get that good nitrogen that we sort of I guess seek from Sub-Clover.
Moving on to the trifoliate leaves, a question that came in was how long would it roughly take for the 3 trifoliate leaves to establish following germination of the plant, and then how long would it need to wait before the germination to grazing of the paddock with Sub-Clover?
Yeah, okay, so the I guess that's going to be a bit dependent on soil temperature, and but usually once it starts germinating, we've got, you know, good rainfall, and it's sort of warmish in autumn. It's going to take about sort of 2 to 3 weeks to get those. I guess it's up and about. So yeah, so after it's germinated, probably you'd be wanting to probably wait at least 3 weeks. You know, to, I suppose, we know that we shouldn't start grazing. I mean, it can grow its 2 little bunny ears or its cotyledons, and then it produces a spade leaf. And that little spade leaf, once we know that that's up and about, we know that the plant is a lot more anchored. So, you know, you can start to potentially graze then, but because that's the juggling act, you know, we're short of feed. But normally we want to wait until those 3 trifoliate leaves are there, or, you know, as many as there, you know, at least 1 trifoliate leaf, because then the plant's well anchored, it won't be pulled out of the ground.
And I suppose that's in the video we're talking about optimum. So if you want to be optimum, you've got to juggle that feed shortage within your own system. So at that time, what is the best control for red-legged earth mite in clovers?
Well, that's a good question, because I just saw that it was close to Geelong Cup, and when I think of Geelong Cup, I always think that it's time to do the time right treatment for red-legged earth mite. So that's you apply an insecticide, and it depends on day length and I guess yeah, your longitude, latitude. So it's a system where you try and stop your red-legged earth mites. You kill them about that around that sort of Geelong Cup day, or whatever the appropriate date is for you, and it stops the red-legged earth mite, kills that population, stops them from producing over-summering eggs or eggs that survive over summer that would then germinate in the following autumn. So I normally, what I like to do with red-legged earth mite is to eat them, eat them with the sheep. And I think that's a really good control method if you've got issues. Otherwise, this time right application of insecticide to stop that population can really sort of reduce things and then sort of gets sort of gets a good sort of effective control for a few years. But you know, the worst thing is you can't keep spraying, because then you just keep getting more and more of these populations coming in, and you're killing off all the predator insects as well.
Yeah, it's a juggle between both management and insecticide use when you really need to use it. And Nick, did you want to ask your questions that you sent in earlier and have a chat with Lisa?
Now I've got to remember them, Michelle.
I've got them printed out.
No, that's all right. Yeah, one was regarding aerial seeding of Sub-Clover and how effective that is in comparison to Balancer clover, which is, or can be, pretty successful. Just in our situation, we've got a lot of rocky ground that's inaccessible by drills, and considering that as a way of getting more sub out there.
Yeah. So Balancer clover is an aerial seeder, so it is always sort of more effective, because Sub-Clover, excuse me, I guess likes to bury its fur. But most of the country was developed through the Southern Super program, just sort of spreading out Sub-Clover from the back of the horse, I suppose, you know, in the early days. So it is effective. It's not as effective as drilling it into the ground, because obviously when you put that seed into the ground, it's more protected. The root can grow into the soil straight away and get well anchored. Being on the surface, it's more subject to being removed by ants. And when it does germinate, if the ground's hard, that little root that first root that comes out of it will be sort of growing along the ground, looking for a bit of soft ground to be able to grow into. And it's subjected to being subjected to the weather, so it can dry out and desiccate. So the tips to get, I suppose, in an aerial situation where you have got rocky ground, you know, there's the opportunity to try and drill around those rocks as you can, but otherwise if you can't do that, then the tips to getting it to work is to have sort of fairly bare ground, you know, not to have a lot of cover on it, so that that seed can have soil contact sort of straight away, to perhaps run over some stock to try and tread that seed into the ground. We used to try and add ant insecticide to the seed to stop seed removal, but we know now that that probably is going to affect the nodulation of seed, and plus you're probably already getting coated seed anyway, so I wouldn't worry about that. And then, as we sort of mentioned before, in that situation, you'll be having the grass growth that will be competing with the clover as well. But it's important not to graze that clover straight away, you know, so you'd probably be wanting to wait for your few leaves to emerge and then sort of start to graze it, because that seed won't be as well anchored compared to if it had been a burr or it had been drilled into the ground, and its roots would have been able to start growing into the ground straight away. So I'd probably delay grazing until you had those 2 or 3 trifoliate or true leaves.
Yeah, okay, yep. And the other part of my question was too, is there anything on the horizon for silvergrass and barleygrass control in permanent pastures as opposed to a traditional simazine and gramoxone mix, and later in the season, low rates of glyphosate?
Well, it's sort of, I suppose, we've got another project that we've got is on weeds as well, less weeds, more feed. So we've been writing fact sheets up on all this stuff. So I suppose getting back to the silvergrass and barleygrass, they're kind of two different grasses. The silvergrass is more reflective of low fertility conditions, particularly low nitrogen. So that might reflect the fact that maybe there's not much sub-clover there. We've seen silvergrass really disappear out of the system when you start to lift that fertility, applying lime and lifting that nitrogen and probably even the phosphorus. However, if you've got barleygrass there as well, and it depends which problem's the bigger one, the barleygrass loves phosphorus, loves nitrogen. We tend to get rid of the silvergrass and we have the barleygrass come in. So you've probably got to look at those reasons first and which one is the most dominant and which is causing the most problems that you want to try and get rid of. In terms of herbicides, they're the only other one that I can think of, and it's also going to cause a loss of winter dry matter production, would be, some people are using Shogun in perennial ryegrass pastures to remove barleygrass, and that seems quite effective, but I don't know that it's got any control of silvergrass. Yep. The other technique, I suppose, it's been used for barleygrass, and it may work with silvergrass to a certain extent, not so much to eradicate them, but just to lessen the amount of seed set, is to spell them towards the end of winter and then allow them all to start to spell them for a couple of weeks so that they start to run. When they start to run to head, that growing point starts to move up the stem, and look for that growing point. And then once it's a bit further up the stem, and then that growing point becomes the seed, if you can heavily graze then and remove that growing point, then you can significantly reduce the amount of, grass that will go on to become, and set seed, I suppose. So that can potentially, in an integrated system, be a bit of a help. The only other way that I can think of that is not going to impact on winter production, which is what we don't want to sort of lose when we're applying herbicides, is silage, cutting for silage. And Jess has been writing a tech note on that for weed control. So that's something I'd probably also consider.
Yep.
But no magic bullets.
That's what I came here for.